She stumbled into the clinic, drenched from the freezing storm, clutching her little sister's hand, her tiny voice cracking as she cried, "Please! We're cold. We're hungry. We haven't eaten." Dr. Sarah Miller knelt down, wrapping a blanket around the shivering girls, but froze when she heard Anna whisper through trembling lips, "Daddy's not dead." For a moment, the entire room fell silent. Two little girls, just 7 and 5, barefoot, pale, their faces streaked with tears, stood there trembling like fragile leaves in the wind. Why were they wandering alone in the storm? Where was their mother, and why did they believe their father was still alive, when everyone else thought he was gone? What Dr. Sarah uncovered next would leave the entire town in tears. As you listen, we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from today? Now, let's begin. Everythi, Montana, lay buried under a thick blanket of snow, where the icy wind howled through narrow streets and clawed at every shuttered window. The night was painfully cold, the kind that seemed to steal the warmth from every breath. Dim yellow lights from the few wooden houses flickered faintly, almost swallowed by the relentless storm sweeping across the small town. Inside one of those houses, a frail glow from a single bulb struggled against the surrounding darkness. In the cramped storage room at the back of the house, Anna sat huddled in the farthest corner, her thin frame shaking beneath her worn, faded sweater. At 7 years old, Anna's straight blonde hair hung around her pale face in tangled strands, clinging to her damp cheeks where tears had carved silent trails. Her wide blue eyes were clouded with fear, but behind them flickered a fragile determination, the instinct of a child who had learned too soon how to protect someone smaller than herself. In her trembling arms was Lily, her little sister, only 5 years old, clutching a battered teddy bear so tightly its seams had begun to split. Lily's longer blonde hair spilled messily around her soft, tear-streaked face. Her tiny nose was red from the cold, her breaths shallow and shaky as she buried her face against Anna's chest. The old sweater she wore was far too thin for the freezing Montana winter, and her bare feet were pressed together against the icy wooden floor, turning pink from the cold. From the other side of the locked door came silence, heavy and absolute, except for the faint hum of the wind pressing against the thin walls of the house. Earlier that evening, the kitchen had been warm and filled with the clatter of dishes, until the sound of a single glass shattering against the floor had frozen everything in place. Anna had dropped it by accident while reaching for a cup of water for Lily. Rick, their stepfather, had stood in the doorway, towering and still, his pale gray eyes narrowing under his furrowed brow. At 42, Rick was a tall, broad-shouldered man with rough stubble shadowing his sharp jawline. His thinning brown hair was slicked back unevenly, and deep grooves of frustration lined his weathered face. Ever since their mother had passed away months ago, Rick's temper had grown harsher, his patience thinner, and his words colder. The weight of unpaid bills, a failing job, and years of quiet resentment had hardened him into someone distant, unpredictable, and frightening to two small girls who barely understood the world around them. When the glass hit the floor, Rick's voice had erupted like thunder. "Can't you do anything right, Anna?" His words sliced through the air, and before she could speak, he had grabbed her arm, dragging her down the narrow hallway as Lily screamed for him to stop. Without a second thought, Rick shoved them into the storage room and slammed the door, the lock clicking sharply into place. Now, hours later, Anna sat curled into the corner, pressing Lily close, trying to make her shivers less violent by wrapping their small bodies beneath one thin blanket. The room smelled faintly of old wood, dust, and something damp. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with jars of forgotten pickles and boxes of winter clothes, but the cold seeped in from every crack, gnawing at their bones. Anna whispered softly into Lily's tangled hair, her voice trembling but steady. "It's okay. I'm here. I promise, Lily. I won't let anything happen to you." But the words felt hollow, and Anna knew it. She was only 7. How could she protect them when she couldn't even open the locked door? Lily sniffled, wiping her small hand across her wet cheeks. Her whisper was barely audible. "Anna, I'm hungry." Her voice broke halfway through the words, fragile and pleading. Anna swallowed hard, forcing back her own tears. "I know, Lily." "Me too." Her voice cracked, and she pressed her face against the top of her sister's head, hiding the pain she didn't want Lily to see. The truth was, this wasn't the first time. Over the last week, Rick had stopped cooking meals for them entirely. He sometimes came home late, reeking of cheap beer, muttering under his breath about bills and burdens, leaving the 2 little girls to fend for themselves. Anna closed her eyes and tried to remember their mother's voice, soft and warm like a lullaby on nights when the world felt safe. But the memory slipped away like snow melting in her hands. Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the loose boards on the side of the house. The storm's fury made the room feel even smaller, colder, as if the whole world had closed in on them. Anna glanced at the tiny window near the ceiling, its glass fogged and cracked at the edges, but she could still see faint shapes of falling snow through the distorted blur. Somewhere beyond that window, life went on. Neighbors tucked safely into warm blankets, fireplaces crackling, laughter echoing softly from lit living rooms. Across the street, June Parker, their elderly neighbor, set down her teacup and stared out her frosted window toward Rick's house. June was 60, her short silver hair tucked behind her ears, her face lined from years of hard winters and quiet wisdom. She had been close to the girl's mother once, often bringing over homemade pies and small gifts for birthdays. Tonight, her heart tightened at the sight of the dark, silent windows, the house swallowed by shadow. But then June shook her head, sighing softly. "Rick's probably teaching them a lesson again," she murmured under her breath, convincing herself it wasn't her place to interfere. She turned away from the window, the faint light from her living room leaving the snow outside untouched. Back in the cold storage room, Lily's tiny body jerked with soft sobs, and Anna rocked her gently, humming under her breath the lullaby their mother used to sing. Her voice cracked on every note, but it steadied Lily enough for her to breathe without hiccups. Anna's stomach twisted painfully, hunger gnawing like claws, but she ignored it. Her mind wandered to a memory so vivid it burned behind her closed eyelids. Her father, Ethan Cole, kneeling in front of her on a bright summer morning, his army uniform crisp, his hands rough but warm, as he tied the laces on her tiny shoes. "Be good, okay, Anna? Look after Lily. Daddy will be back before you know it." His voice had been strong, certain. Then he had stood, kissed their mother on the cheek, and walked away. That was the last time Anna saw him. "Daddy's not dead," she whispered, as if saying it out loud could make it true. Lily stirred against her chest, murmuring sleepily, "He'll come back, right?" Anna tightened her arms around her little sister, pressing her lips to her forehead. "Yes," she breathed, more to herself than to Lily, "he'll come back. I know he will." Somewhere in the distance, the faint sound of a car door slammed, muffled by the storm. But no footsteps approached the house. No one came to check on them, and so the two sisters stayed there, huddled in the darkness, their small bodies trembling against the weight of a world that had already taken too much from them. Outside, the storm raged on, indifferent and unyielding, as if the night itself had turned its back. Across the street, lights dimmed one by one as the neighborhood settled into uneasy sleep, each neighbor believing the same quiet lie, that the two little girls in Rick's house were safe, merely being disciplined for childish mistakes. No one came. Not yet. The next morning, the storm had quieted, but Everpine, Montana, remained trapped in winter's grip. Snow lay piled against fences and doorsteps, its weight bending branches and muffling every sound. The small town felt still, as if holding its breath, waiting for the sun to bring warmth it rarely delivered in these bitter months. Inside Everpine Elementary, the small, worn-down school nestled at the edge of town, children shuffled into classrooms, their boots dripping melted snow onto faded linoleum floors. The walls were decorated with bright drawings and paper snowflakes, a fragile attempt to bring cheer to the harsh season outside. At the far end of the hallway sat the school's modest nurse's office, where Dr. Sarah Miller leaned over her desk, reviewing a set of student health records. Sarah was 32 years old, tall and slender, with long chestnut brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail, soft hazel eyes behind thin rectangular glasses, and pale skin that flushed easily in the cold. A deep sense of quiet kindness radiated from her, tempered by a quiet resilience forged years ago when she lost her younger brother in a childhood accident, an unhealed scar that had shaped her dedication to caring for children. Her colleagues respected her for her patience and her ability to listen when others couldn't. That morning, the school secretary appeared in the doorway, her breath uneven from rushing down the hall. "Sarah," she whispered, "it's Anna and Lily Cole again. Their teacher sent them here." Sarah set her pen down immediately and hurried to the door. In the hallway, Anna stood with her small shoulders hunched forward, holding Lily's hand tightly. Both girls looked fragile under the fluorescent lights, their blonde hair messy and damp from melting snow. Their faded sweaters were thin and ill-fitting, and their shoes were worn down, barely protecting them from the cold. Sarah crouched down to their level, her voice soft but steady. "Hi, Anna. Hi, Lily. Why don't we go inside where it's warm?" Anna's blue eyes darted up briefly, full of hesitation before she nodded faintly. Lily said nothing, clutching her old teddy bear closer to her chest. Inside the small office, Sarah guided them to the padded bench beneath the window and gently examined their hands and faces. She noticed a faint bruise along Anna's wrist, barely visible beneath the sleeve of her sweater, and a small scratch on Lily's knee. These weren't fresh injuries, and they didn't seem accidental. Sarah knelt in front of them, speaking softly. "Did something happen at home, sweetheart?" Anna shook her head quickly, her lips pressing into a tight line. "No, it was an accident," she whispered, the same words children often used when trying to protect someone. Lily looked up at Sarah with wide, watery eyes and blurted out in a tiny voice, "We're hungry," before burying her face back into Anna's side. Sarah's chest tightened as she exhaled slowly, forcing herself to remain composed. She reached for a blanket from the shelf and draped it over the girls, offering them small cups of warm tea from her thermos. "You're safe here," she whispered, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's flushed cheek. Minutes passed in silence except for the distant hum of voices outside the office. Then Anna's voice broke softly, so fragile Sarah almost didn't hear it. Our mommy's gone, she said, her blue eyes filling with tears she fought to hold back. She got sick and didn't wake up. Sarah's heart sank, and she moved closer, gently placing a hand on Anna's small shoulder. I know, sweetheart, she murmured, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to sound steady. Lily finally looked up, her tiny voice shaking as she asked the question that had been haunting her. Will Mommy come back? Sarah's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she struggled for the right words, her mind flashing back to the hospital room where she had lost her brother all those years ago, the same helplessness reflected in Anna and Lily's tear-streaked faces now. Finally, she cupped Lily's cheek and whispered, No, sweetie, Mommy isn't coming back, but you still have each other. You still have love, and you are not alone. The words seemed to break something inside them. Both girls dissolved into tears, clinging to each other tightly. Sarah gently wrapped her arms around their small bodies, holding them as they sobbed into her shoulder. The warmth of her embrace contrasted painfully with the cold reality of what they carried on their small shoulders. When the tears began to slow, Sarah guided Anna to sit beside her and handed her a small packet of crackers from her desk drawer. Eat these, sweetheart, she urged softly. Your body needs warmth. Anna hesitated before taking one, carefully splitting it in half to give the larger piece to Lily. The simple gesture told Sarah everything she needed to know about Anna's quiet strength. As Sarah watched them, her concern deepened. The thin clothing, the repeated hunger, the faint bruises, none of this added up to just bad luck. She thought of Rick, their stepfather, a man she'd only seen once at a school meeting. He had arrived late, his gray eyes cold and distracted, his heavy boots tracking slush across the floor. He hadn't looked at Anna or Lily even once. Sarah's instincts screamed that something was wrong inside that house. Still kneeling, Sarah tried carefully. Anna, can you tell me if Rick gets upset a lot? Anna froze, her tiny shoulders tensing. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Finally, Anna whispered, We try to be quiet. That was all she said before burying her face in her hands. Sarah didn't push further. She had seen enough in her years of work to know when words were locked behind fear, but her unease grew heavier, pulling at her like the weight of the winter outside. When the school bell rang, Sarah helped the girls gather their things and walk them back to class, but her thoughts followed them long after they disappeared down the hallway. Small figures swallowed by a sea of backpacks and winter coats. Standing by her office window, Sarah stared out at the snow-covered street, the flakes drifting lazily now under a pale sun. Her jaw tightened as a quiet resolve settled over her. She couldn't ignore this, not when two little girls were showing her silent cries for help with every bruise and whispered word. That afternoon, as the school emptied and the muffled voices faded, Sarah sat alone in her office staring at the phone on her desk. She knew the path forward wouldn't be simple. Calling Child Protective Services could change everything, but doing nothing could leave the girls in danger. Outside, the snow continued to fall, silent and relentless, as Everpine held its secrets close. And somewhere inside that quiet house on the edge of town, two little girls waited for warmth and safety that never came. The cold wind howled outside the small wooden house in Everpine, carrying loose snowflakes across the silent street as dusk fell early over the frozen town. Inside the dimly lit living room, Anna sat quietly on the floor, tracing circles on the worn carpet with her finger. The air was heavy with the faint scent of stale beer and cold ashes from the fireplace, which hadn't been lit in days. Across the room, Rick paced back and forth, his deep-set gray eyes locked on the glowing screen of his old phone, his voice low but urgent. Anna knew better than to make noise when Rick was on the phone. But tonight, something in his tense movements made her stay unusually alert. Rick, in his early 40s, was a tall, broad-shouldered man with rough stubble shadowing his angular jawline and sharp cheekbones. His thinning brown hair clung damply to his forehead from the sweat that formed whenever he grew agitated. Years of financial strain, bitterness, and constant failures had turned him into a man who rarely smiled. To outsiders, he often carried himself with false confidence, but behind closed doors, his frustrations simmered dangerously close to the surface. Tonight, his voice sounded colder than usual, and every clipped word made Anna's stomach twist. She shifted silently, crawling closer to the hallway where shadows gathered, leaning her tiny ear against the wooden frame to listen. Through the muffled tone of his voice, she caught fragments of Rick's conversation. Yes, it's automatic every month. The military compensation as long as he's marked missing. No, they don't need to know where it goes. I've told you, this is my right. Anna's small hands clenched into fists as her blue eyes widened. Her chest tightened, her breath shallow, but she forced herself to stay quiet. The words sank slowly into her 7-year-old mind, one by one, heavy and confusing. Military compensation, missing, Daddy. They were talking about Daddy. She stayed perfectly still, heart pounding as Rick continued. If they find out, we lose everything. As long as they believe Ethan Cole is gone, this stays safe. I won't let anyone ruin that. He ended the call abruptly, shoving the phone deep into his pocket and muttering under his breath as he stormed toward the kitchen. When Rick's heavy boots disappeared into the creaking hallway, Anna slipped away, holding her breath until she reached the small bedroom she shared with Lily. Inside, the dim light from the single bulb barely touched the cracked wallpaper, and the faint chill of the night pressed through the thin walls. Lily, her 5-year-old sister, sat cross-legged on the floor, brushing the worn fur of her one-eyed teddy bear with tiny, shaky hands. Her straight blonde hair fell into her round face, and her wide blue eyes lit up when she saw Anna. Anna knelt down beside her, her voice low and urgent. Lily, I think Daddy's not gone. Lily blinked, confused. What? She whispered, tilting her head. Anna leaned closer, her blonde hair falling forward as she whispered into her sister's ear. I heard Rick. He gets money because Daddy's missing. They think he's dead, but he's not. He's missing. Lily's small mouth trembled, her lower lip quivering. Does that mean Daddy's coming home? Anna hesitated, but her heart clung stubbornly to the memory of the tall man with kind gray eyes. Yes, she whispered firmly, wrapping her arms around Lily. If Daddy's alive, he'll find us. I know he will. Lily clung back tightly, tears gathering in her eyes. She pressed her teddy bear between them, whispering, I want Daddy and Shadow. At the mention of the name, Anna smiled faintly through her worry. Do you remember Shadow? Lily nodded quickly, her tiny voice soft and dreamy. Big doggy, fluffy ears. Anna closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the memory push back the cold that had sunk into their bones. Shadow, their father's German shepherd, had been just a playful puppy when Daddy first brought him home. Now, Shadow would be 5 years old, a fully trained K9, black and tan fur gleaming under the sun, muscles lean and powerful from years of specialized military training. Their father had always said Shadow was special, smarter than most, able to track scents across miles, his loyalty unbreakable. Anna pulled Lily closer and began whispering the stories Daddy used to tell them. Afternoons when they would throw a ball in the front yard while Shadow bounded after it, tail wagging furiously, and evenings when Daddy taught them how to braid tiny daisy chains under the fading summer sun. Her voice softened when she described the day Daddy left. His crisp military uniform, the sound of his boots on the porch, the warm hug that seemed to last forever. "Be brave for me," he had said, his hand resting gently on Anna's small shoulder. "Take care of your sister. I'll come back before you know it." Anna paused, her throat tightening as she tried to keep her voice steady. "He promised, Lily. Daddy promised." Lily sniffled and buried her face into Anna's sweater. "But why doesn't he come?" she asked, her voice muffled. Anna hesitated, her tiny fingers twisting the edge of the worn blanket. Maybe he can't. Maybe something happened, and he's trying to come home, but he doesn't know where we are." Her young mind struggled to understand the truth, piecing fragments together with hope and longing. Outside their small bedroom window, the wind rattled against the frosted glass, carrying distant sounds of laughter and clinking glasses from houses where families gathered for warmth. Inside, the sisters sat in silence, clutching each other tightly, surrounded by the shadows of a house that felt colder every passing day. In the kitchen, Rick's muffled movements stopped suddenly, and Anna stiffened, holding Lily close. His voice barked down the hallway. "Lights out. No talking." They froze, small bodies curling instinctively tighter, hearts thundering beneath thin sweaters. Long after the house fell silent, Anna remained awake, her gaze fixed on the cracked ceiling above her bed. Fragments of her father's face drifted through her thoughts, his strong jaw, tanned skin, and the soft gray of his steady eyes. Her chest rose and fell unevenly, each breath caught between fear and fragile hope. She whispered into the quiet darkness, barely audible even to herself. "If Daddy's still out there, he'll come for us. I know he will." And somewhere far from Everpine, under the same frozen stars, Ethan Cole, her father, once thought dead, was indeed alive. The blizzard arrived before dawn, swallowing Everpine, Montana, beneath a merciless wall of white. Winds screamed through the narrow streets, ripping branches from trees and hurling loose snow into swirling chaos. The temperature plunged far below freezing, and the entire town seemed to sink into silence, except for the distant roar of the storm battering rooftops. Inside the small wooden house at the edge of the town, Anna sat on the thin carpet of their shared bedroom, clutching Lily tightly beneath a frayed old blanket. Her straight blonde hair clung damply to her pale cheeks as she rocked slightly back and forth, trying to generate warmth where none existed. Their breath fogged faintly in the freezing air, the old heater long dead and silent. Lily, only 5 years old, trembled in her sister's arms, clutching her one-eyed teddy bear close to her chest. Her tiny hands were cold to the touch, and her lips had begun to pale. But she said nothing, as though speaking might shatter the fragile bubble of safety Anna tried desperately to maintain. Rick had disappeared 2 days ago. He left without a word, slamming the door behind him and muttering curses about bills and his rights. Since then, the sisters had been left alone, locked inside the cold house with nearly empty cupboards and no way to reach help. Anna had scavenged what little she could find: 2 stale crackers, half an apple, and split them evenly with Lily, ignoring her own gnawing hunger. Lily whimpered softly, curling tighter under the blanket. "Anna, I'm cold." "I know," Anna whispered, brushing strands of Lily's hair gently from her face, forcing herself to sound strong even as her voice trembled. "I'm here. We'll be okay." But deep inside, fear clawed at her. She had promised Lily she would protect her, but she didn't know how much longer they could last. Across the street, June Parker, their elderly neighbor, stood at her frost-lined window, gazing toward the dark, silent house. At 60 years old, June had short silver hair tucked neatly behind her ears, deep wrinkles carved by time and countless Montana winters, and sharp brown eyes that rarely missed a detail. Once a schoolteacher, she had an air of quiet authority softened by a hidden kindness, especially toward children. Tonight, unease crept into her chest as she noticed there were no lights in the house despite the brutal storm. June hesitated, gripping her wool shawl tighter around her shoulders. Memories of their late mother, her warm smile, their long chats over tea, made June's heart ache. She knew Rick's temper, and though she had always kept her distance to avoid conflict, something felt different now. Her gut told her something was terribly wrong. Determined, June reached for her phone with shaking hands and dialed the local authorities. Within minutes, she was connected to the Everpine Police Department, where a calm but firm voice answered, "Officer Dean Harris, a man in his late 40s with close-cropped salt and pepper hair, a square jaw shadowed by stubble, and deep lines etched across his forehead from years of long shifts and bitter winters. Known for his no-nonsense attitude and steady composure under pressure, Dean had served Everpine for over 2 decades. "Officer Harris speaking," he said, his low baritone steady. "Dean, it's June Parker," she replied, her voice tight. "I think something's wrong at Rick Coleman's house. The storm's bad, and I haven't seen the girls or him for days. No lights, no heat." Dean frowned, scribbling down notes as he leaned back in his creaking chair. "All right, June. Stay inside where it's warm. I'll send someone to check it out." After ending the call, June hesitated again, debating whether to involve Dr. Sarah Miller. She quickly decided she had no choice. Sarah had always cared deeply for Anna and Lily since meeting them at the school. Sarah, 32 years old, had just finished her shift at the clinic when her phone rang. Wrapping her long chestnut brown hair into a loose bun, she pressed the receiver against her ear and listened quietly as June explained the situation. A surge of dread settled in her chest, mingled with the quiet determination she was known for. "I'll meet the officers there," Sarah said firmly, grabbing her heavy coat from the hook and stepping into the biting wind. Minutes later, Officer Harris arrived at Rick's house with another younger officer, Ben Ortiz, a rookie barely 26, slim, with cropped black hair and warm brown eyes, his cheeks pink from the cold. Ben's calm, measured tone balanced Dean's sharp directness, and the two made their way up the icy porch together, snow crunching beneath their boots. Dean knocked hard on the front door, his gloved fist pounding against the wood. "Police! Anyone inside?" Silence. He tried again, louder this time, but still there was no answer. Ben glanced at him uneasily. "Should we force entry?" Before Dean could decide, the sound of heavy boots crunching snow made everyone turn. Rick was staggering up the driveway, his unshaven jaw tense, and his gray eyes narrowed with practiced annoyance. His cheap leather jacket was dusted with snow, and his breath carried the faint, bitter scent of alcohol. "What the hell's going on here?" Rick barked, glaring at Dean and Ben. Dean straightened, his deep voice steady but firm. "Your neighbor called, Rick. Said she's worried about the kids. We're here to make sure they're safe." Rick's jaw clenched, and for a moment his face twitched, a flash of anger barely restrained. Then, forcing his expression into something resembling concern, he scoffed. "Kids? They're fine. Probably hiding under the bed or something. You know how they are. Dramatic little troublemakers." Sarah stepped forward, her breath visible in the frozen air, and fixed her hazel gaze on Rick. "Then let us see them," she said evenly, her voice soft but unyielding. Rick's gray eyes hardened. "No one's coming inside my house without a warrant." Ben shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Dean and Sarah. But Dean kept his gaze steady on Rick. "We've got enough reason to request one if we need it. Open the door, Rick." Rick hesitated, the storm whipping his coat violently around him before finally letting out an exasperated sigh. "Fine. But don't come crying to me when you find out those kids aren't where you think." He unlocked the door and swung it open, revealing the dark, icy interior of the house. Inside, Anna and Lily sat huddled together under the threadbare blanket, their wide blue eyes reflecting fear and confusion as they stared at the unfamiliar faces filling the doorway. Sarah's chest tightened at the sight, and she immediately crouched down, her soft voice breaking through the tension. "Sweethearts, it's okay. I'm here now." Anna clutched Lily closer, whispering into her hair. "It's okay. Don't cry. I'm here." But her trembling voice betrayed the strength she tried so hard to project. Rick crossed his arms and leaned against the doorframe, his voice sharp and defensive. "See? Alive. Unharmed. They like to run outside when I'm gone. Probably why they're freezing. Kids never listen." Sarah turned slowly, meeting Dean's gaze, and she didn't have to say anything. The truth hung heavily between them. Something was wrong here. Very wrong. That night, as the officers left reluctantly, Sarah lingered on the porch watching Rick's shadow move behind the curtain. The storm raged on, but in Sarah's chest a colder, heavier storm was beginning to form. Far from the snow-choked streets of Everpine, Montana, the sun burned down on a sprawling, isolated desert base somewhere deep in Iraq. The air was suffocating, thick with heat and the metallic taste of dust. But inside a dim concrete holding cell, a man sat slumped against the wall, his sharp jaw shadowed by several days of stubble. Ethan Cole, once thought dead, breathed heavily, his steel-gray eyes staring at the cracks in the floor as the echo of distant rotor blades hummed through the walls. At 38, Ethan's tall, lean frame had grown hardened from years of combat, his skin tanned and rough from the relentless sun. Short black hair clung damply to his forehead, and faint scars marked his arms, reminders of battles fought both abroad and within. Once a highly skilled Navy Special Operations soldier, Ethan had been declared killed in action during a classified mission. But the truth was far more complicated. 2 years ago, during a nighttime raid, Ethan's team had walked into an ambush. Explosions tore through their convoy, gunfire split in the silence, chaos erupting under the pale desert moon. Amidst the smoke and screams, Ethan dragged his wounded teammate, Captain David Hayes, out from the wreckage. That act of defiance cost him his freedom. Enemy forces captured Ethan when he refused to abandon his men, and he had been held since then in a covert detention facility, officially off the record. The only thing keeping him sane in that lonely place was Shadow, his German Shepherd K9 partner. Now, 5 years old, Shadow was massive, his thick black and tan coat dulled by sand, but his amber eyes still sharp and alive. Trained as a military working dog, Shadow was loyal beyond reason, capable of tracking targets for miles and responding to Ethan's commands with absolute precision. But to Ethan, Shadow was more than just a partner. He was family. Shadow had been there in the silent hours when nightmares consumed Ethan, nudging his hand until he woke, grounding him in reality when hopelessness clawed too deep. On this day, the metallic door creaked open. A tall American officer in desert fatigues stepped in, his boots scraping against the concrete floor. Colonel Marcus Reynolds, a man in his early 50s, had a commanding presence, his square jaw lined with gray stubble, sun-scorched skin, and intense green eyes that rarely softened. He had the posture of someone accustomed to carrying secrets heavier than himself. "Cole," Reynolds said, his voice deep and steady, "it's over. Washington cleared your release this morning." Ethan's breath hitched, his usually composed features cracking slightly as he looked up, disbelief flashing through his gray eyes. "Release?" he rasped, his voice rough from weeks of silence. Reynolds nodded, crossing his arms. "You've been a ghost for 2 years. Officially, you were dead. But intel shifted. You're going home." He paused, lowering his voice. "I'm sorry it took this long." Ethan stared at the colonel for a long moment, his chest rising and falling unevenly. Then, slowly, he placed a steady hand on Shadow's thick neck. "We're going home, boy," he whispered, his voice breaking on the last word. The journey back to the U.S. was a blur of roaring engines, flashing lights, and pounding memories. Hours later, Ethan stepped off the military transport plane into the biting cold air of Washington, the shock of snow after years of desert heat almost overwhelming. Shadow stayed glued to his side, his ears twitching as he sniffed the unfamiliar air, amber eyes locked on his handler for direction. Ethan's first stop was the Department of Veterans Affairs, where the truth of his death began to unravel. Paperwork stacked on the officer's desk confirmed it all. Ethan Cole had been officially listed as killed in action, a designation that triggered survivor benefits for his dependents. The same benefits Rick had been collecting while claiming guardianship of Anna and Lily. The young VA officer, Mark Langston, barely 30, with messy brown hair and round glasses perched on his narrow nose, explained carefully, "Mr. Cole, it seems your stepchildren were left under Rick Coleman's care. Since you were listed as deceased, legal custody automatically transferred. But," he hesitated, clearing his throat uncomfortably, "there have been reports. Neighbors raised concerns. If the situation's confirmed, Child Protective Services could move the girls into foster care." Ethan froze, his jaw tightening as heat surged beneath his skin. He could see Shadow shifting uneasily beside him, sensing his rising tension. Ethan clenched his fists until his knuckles whitened. "You're telling me," he said slowly, his voice dangerously low, "that my girls might end up in a foster home because they think I'm dead?" Mark swallowed nervously, nodding. "I'm sorry, sir, but if there's a neglect involved, that's where it's headed." The words struck Ethan harder than any bullet he'd ever taken. Images of Anna's bright blue eyes and Lily's shy little smile flooded his mind. Memories of teaching them to ride bikes, of chasing them across the backyard with Shadow bounding alongside. He hadn't fought through years of hell to come back and lose them now. Within hours, Ethan packed what little he owned into a small duffel bag, strapped on his winter jacket, and drove a rented SUV north toward Everpine, Montana. Shadow sat in the back seat, his black and tan fur bristling lightly as the tires crunched across icy roads. The farther they traveled, the deeper the snow became. Pine trees bowing under its weight as shadows lengthened across the mountains. As they neared Everpine, the whispers of Rick's lies reached Ethan's ears through quiet phone calls with June Parker and Sarah Miller, both voices trembling with relief and disbelief upon hearing Ethan's voice for the first time in years. From Sarah, he learned that Rick had told authorities the girls sometimes wandered off on their own, downplaying the neglect while diverting suspicion. The thought of Rick using Anna and Lily to secure money boiled Ethan's blood. Shadow, sensing the change in Ethan's breathing, rested his massive head against his shoulder from the back seat, grounding him as he had so many times before. By the time Ethan reached the edge of Everpine, night had fallen, and a soft snowstorm had begun sweeping across the town. The warm glow of houses lined the quiet streets, but his gaze fixed only on one shadowed corner of the neighborhood, Rick's house, where the faintest sliver of light glimmered behind drawn curtains. He pulled over and killed the engine, resting his hands on the steering wheel as his breath misted the cold air. Shadow leaned forward, his wet nose pressing against Ethan's arm, amber eyes locked with his handler's steady gray ones. "We'll get them back," Ethan whispered, his voice hoarse but resolute. "No one takes my girls from me. Not now. Not ever." And in the stillness of that frozen night, with the wind rattling loose shingles and Shadow's steady breath at his side, Ethan Cole prepared to reclaim his daughters, no matter what it cost. The blizzard howled across Everpine, Montana, swallowing the small town in waves of white. Snowdrifts piled against doorways, street lamps glowed dimly through the swirling frost, and the icy wind sliced through the night like knives. The temperature had plunged dangerously low, but inside Rick's shadowed house, the cold wasn't the only thing suffocating the two small girls trapped within. Rick Coleman, furious after days of police questioning and whispers spreading across town, stormed into the narrow hallway of his home, his boots thudding heavily against the wooden floor. At 42, Rick's broad shoulders and tall frame made him an imposing figure, but tonight his pale gray eyes burned with unrestrained anger. His unshaven jaw was tight, the rough stubble bristling as he muttered curses under his breath. Ever since the storm of suspicion began, Rick's temper had spiraled into something more dangerous than before. "Think you can make me look like the bad guy?" he growled, his voice low and venomous as he dragged Anna and Lily by their small wrists toward the storage room. "Fine. You want me to be the villain? Let's play that game." Anna, 7 years old, struggled to keep up, her thin frame shaking under her oversized sweater. Her straight blonde hair clung to her damp cheeks, and her wide blue eyes brimmed with fear but burned faintly with defiance. Lily, only 5, clutched her one-eyed teddy bear tightly against her chest, her lower lip trembling as tears welled silently. Neither girl spoke. They had learned long ago that words only fueled Rick's rage. Rick shoved open the storage room door and gestured sharply. "Inside, both of you." The girls obeyed without hesitation, huddling together as the door slammed shut, the sharp metallic click of the lock sealing them in. The small room was dark and freezing, the floor icy beneath their bare feet. The single drafty window let in gusts of frigid air, and the old blanket Anna clutched around them barely kept out the cold. Lily whimpered softly, tucking her face into Anna's shoulder. "Anna, I'm scared," she whispered, her tiny voice shaking. Anna stroked Lily's tangled blonde hair, fighting to keep her own tears at bay. "It's okay," she murmured, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "Daddy's going to find us. I know he will." Outside, the storm raged louder, rattling the thin walls of the house as if the blizzard itself knew what was happening inside. Miles away, on the edge of Everpine's snow-buried outskirts, Ethan Cole tightened his grip on the steering wheel of the rented SUV. At 38, his lean, muscular frame tensed beneath his winter jacket. His steel-gray eyes focused intently on the faint road ahead, as sheets of snow blurred his view. The long drive from Washington had left exhaustion etched into his sharp features, but his expression remained unyielding. Shadow, his loyal 5-year-old German shepherd, sat upright in the back seat, ears pricked and amber eyes scanning the swirling darkness outside. Shadow shifted suddenly, his nose pressed firmly against the glass, letting out a low, urgent whine. Ethan glanced in the rearview mirror, recognizing that sound instantly. "You smell them, don't you?" he murmured. Shadow barked once, sharp and decisive, his entire body alert. Ethan pulled off the icy road, parking the vehicle by the tree line. Snowflakes whipped across his face as he stepped out into the biting wind, the crunch of boots muffled by the storm's roar. Shadow bounded into the snow beside him, his powerful body cutting through the drifts effortlessly, his black and tan coat dusted white with frost. Ethan followed close behind, his breath clouding the frozen air, every muscle in his body coiled with urgency. Shadow moved with precision, nose to the ground, weaving through the storm as if led by an invisible thread. They cut across an open field before reaching the narrow street where Rick's house sat in oppressive silence, its windows dark except for a faint glow from one corner. Ethan crouched behind a snow-covered fence, Shadow leaning into his leg, ears twitching. Through the muffled roar of the wind, Ethan heard it, a muffled, choked sob, his chest constricted. That sound could only belong to Anna or Lily. He surged forward, boots crunching heavily in the snow, and reached the front porch in seconds. The door was locked tight, but Ethan didn't hesitate. He slammed his shoulder against the old wooden frame, muscles straining, until it burst inward with a deafening crack. Inside, the house was frigid and dimly lit, silence pressing down like a weight. Shadow slipped past Ethan, his nails clicking softly against the floor as his sharp nose led him straight down the hallway. Ethan followed, his pulse pounding louder than the storm outside, until Shadow stopped abruptly before the storage room door, growling low and steady. Ethan gripped the handle, twisting hard, but it wouldn't budge. He braced himself and kicked hard once, then twice, the rotten wood splintering beneath his boot until the lock gave way. The door swung open with a bang, and there they were. Anna and Lily sat huddled in the farthest corner, their small bodies wrapped beneath the thin blanket, trembling violently from cold and fear. Lily's blue eyes widened as she clutched her teddy bear tighter, while Anna's tear-streaked face lifted slowly, disbelief flooding her gaze. For a moment, the world fell silent. The storm outside, Ethan's ragged breath, Shadow's low whine, all muted beneath the weight of recognition. "Daddy?" Anna's voice cracked, barely more than a whisper at first, then louder, desperate, raw with emotion. "Daddy!" Ethan dropped to his knees, his arms opening as Anna launched herself into his chest. Lily stumbled after her sister, dropping the teddy bear as Shadow nudged close, his massive frame pressing gently against her side. Lily buried her face into Shadow's thick fur, sobbing quietly as the German Shepherd licked her damp cheeks, tail wagging softly despite the tension in the room. Ethan held both girls tightly, his strong arms curling protectively around them as tears slid freely down his wind-chapped face. He pressed his forehead against Anna's damp hair, his voice cracking in a hoarse whisper. "I'm here now. I've got you. You're safe." The cold around them seemed to fade in that moment as warmth returned through touch, through the sound of their shared breath, through the pounding rhythm of three hearts beating together after years of separation. Behind them, the broken door swung loosely on its hinges as the storm howled through the open hallway, carrying with it the promise of change and the warning that this battle was only beginning. The first light of morning stretched across Everpine, Montana, painting the snow-covered streets in soft hues of gold and silver. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind silence broken only by the faint creak of branches heavy with ice. Inside the Everpine Police Department, the tension that had gripped the town for weeks was finally reaching its breaking point. Rick Coleman, his face pale and drawn, sat slumped in a metal chair under the dim light of the interrogation room. At 42, his once intimidating posture had wilted into something smaller, his gray eyes darting nervously while his unshaven jaw trembled faintly. He still wore his faded leather jacket dusted with snow, but his hands, resting on the table, couldn't hide the restless tapping of his fingers. Across from him stood Officer Dean Harris, his broad frame casting a steady shadow. Dean, a 48-year-old veteran of the Everpine Force, had short salt and pepper hair and deep lines carved across his rugged face, marks of decades spent protecting a small town through bitter winters and quiet tragedies. Dean's tone was calm but unyielding. "Rick, we've got sworn statements from neighbors, from the school, from Dr. Sarah Miller. We've got photographic evidence of bruises on the girls. And now we've confirmed your use of Ethan Cole's death benefits while hiding his survival status." He leaned forward slightly, his gray-green eyes hardening. "This is over." Rick's jaw clenched, his pale lips curling into something between a sneer and desperation. "You don't get it," he muttered hoarsely, his voice cracking. "I gave up everything for this house, for those kids, and now—" "You left them locked in a freezing room for days, Rick." Dean cut him off sharply, his tone rising for the first time. "That's not taking care of children. That's abuse." Rick's shoulders sagged as if the weight of the truth had finally crushed him. He didn't speak again, and moments later the metallic click of handcuffs filled the room. Outside the police station, Ethan Cole stood beneath the soft winter sun, Shadow sitting obediently at his side, the dog's thick black and tan coat gleaming faintly under the morning light. Ethan's lean, tall figure was tense beneath his dark winter jacket, his steel-gray eyes focused on the courthouse steps where final paperwork would be filed. Shadow's amber eyes watched Ethan closely, his ears twitching whenever his handler shifted. The loyal 5-year-old German Shepherd had rarely left Ethan's side since they returned from Iraq, as though he sensed the fragile nature of this reunion and refused to let Ethan face it alone. Moments later, Dr. Sarah Miller approached with June Parker at her side, their breath visible in the crisp air. Sarah, 32, tall and slender with her chestnut brown hair pulled into a neat ponytail, looked relieved but weary, dark circles beneath her hazel eyes hinting at restless nights spent worrying over Anna and Lily. At her side, June, 60 years old, wore her thick wool coat tightly wrapped around her petite frame, her silver hair tucked beneath a knitted cap. Her sharp brown eyes, once skeptical, now carried the weight of quiet satisfaction. Sarah gave Ethan a small, encouraging smile. "It's official," she said softly, holding up a folder. "With Rick in custody, the court's granting you full custody of Anna and Lily." Ethan's breath caught for a moment, his expression hardening before softening into something rare. Relief. "Thank you," he said, his deep voice low and rough, but steady. He looked at Sarah and June in turn, his gaze full of gratitude that words couldn't quite express. June folded her arms, her expression stern but her voice warm. "Those girls deserve better than what they've had," she said firmly, "and I reckon they'll get it now." Later that afternoon, Ethan drove the girls toward their new home, a cozy log cabin nestled near the edge of Everpine Forest. The narrow path was lined with towering evergreens dusted with snow, sunlight scattering across their branches like fragments of glass. Anna sat in the back seat beside Lily, their small hands entwined, while Shadow lay sprawled across the other side, his large body keeping them warm as the girls rested against his soft fur. When they arrived, the cabin's rustic charm immediately stood out. Warm cedar walls, a stone fireplace inside, and a wide window overlooking the frozen lake beyond the trees. Ethan stepped out first, breathing in the crisp mountain air, before opening the back door and helping the girls out carefully. Anna gazed up at the cabin, her straight blonde hair glinting gold under the sunlight, her wide blue eyes uncertain but full of quiet hope. Lily, clutching her teddy bear tightly, pressed herself closer to Ethan's leg, her small voice soft. "Is this home now?" Ethan knelt down to her level, cupping Lily's cold cheeks gently in his calloused hands. "Yes," he said softly, his voice breaking just slightly. "This is home. You're safe here now." Shadow barked once, tail wagging as though sealing the promise. Inside, Ethan unpacked what little they had managed to carry, setting up the small living room while Anna and Lily explored the cabin. The two girls paused near the wide window, drawn by the sunlight spilling across the snow outside. Anna pressed her hand against the glass, whispering, "It's warm here." Lily leaned against her sister's shoulder, hugging Shadow's neck tightly as the dog sat patiently beside them, his steady breath comforting in the quiet. Ethan stood behind them, one hand resting gently on the windowsill as his steel-gray eyes softened. For the first time in years, his chest felt lighter, the crushing weight of uncertainty finally lifted. The golden rays of late afternoon danced through the window, painting the room in warmth and light. The storm had passed. The silence that once haunted their nights had been replaced by laughter, faint but growing stronger. After years of loss, fear, and separation, they were finally together again, a family rebuilt beneath the pale Montana sun. Sometimes life takes us through the darkest storms before we find the light again. For Anna, Lily, Ethan, and Shadow, what seemed like the end became a miracle. A family, torn apart by loss, was brought back together by grace, love, and faith. We are reminded that even when hope feels distant, God's plans are never silent. He works in ways we cannot always see, through the people around us, through unexpected paths, and through the strength He places in our hearts. The coldest winters eventually give way to spring, and no matter how long the night, the dawn will come. Maybe you, too, have faced storms, moments of heartbreak, loneliness, or fear. Know this: you are not forgotten. Just as Anna and Lily's prayers were answered, there are miracles waiting for you too. Sometimes God sends them in the quietest ways, through love, through courage, through those who refuse to give up on us. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, and join our community by subscribing. Together, we can keep spreading stories of hope and faith. Stories that remind us that even in the darkest nights, God is still writing our miracles. May God bless you and your loved ones, and may He guide you through your own storms into the light you've been waiting for.